That's why they call it a leap of faith. They don't call it a leap of certainty. And I think a lot of times we look for certainty and we try to keep one toe on the ground with the other foot in the air. And that's not a proper leap of faith. A leap of faith is both feet have to leave the ground. You have to be gaining momentum. There's a part of you that's going to be scared as hell. You don't know when or how the net is going to appear. You just trust that it is going to appear.
All right, Light Watkins, what a treat, man. Great to be with you.
Good to be back. Actually, this is my first time in person with you. The last time I was here, it was virtually.
Yeah. Better in four-dimensional space-time.
Yeah.
And I've been on your show.
Yeah.
But virtually. So here we are, sitting here. And as I was thinking about sitting here, I was reminiscing about the first time we met or the circumstances that brought us together for the first time. And I believe that was around The Shine, because you were producing and starring in that show. And I loved the idea. I was covetous of the fact that you brought The Shine to life, because that's a concept that I was very invested in. I loved it. So can you describe for the people that never got to experience it what The Shine was? And there's a purpose. I'm going somewhere with it.
Yeah, no, The Shine was an event that I downloaded, so to speak, in 2013 to do this event where you bring together, it was really all the things that I wanted to experience in Los Angeles that I wasn't able to experience because I was not into socializing around places that were more alcohol centric. So I thought, maybe I'll just, it's like that. You remember the movie Field of Dreams? Yeah. With, what's his name? Kevin Costner.
That's right.
He builds his baseball field in the middle of the cornfield, and then all these players come out. Anyways, and the whole point was
you were
that
Kevin Costner
if you have faith and you listen to the thing in your heart and you create it, then the people who appreciate it the most will come. So I kind of was inspired by that. That movie always stuck with me. There's certain movies that just stick with you, and that one was one that stuck with me. And when I turned 40, I realized that I wasn't really being social because I stopped drinking when I was 25. I didn't have a problem with alcohol or anything like that. I just it didn't add up anymore. And I thought, let me see what life is like without alcohol. And I just didn't miss it. So I just kind of stopped, and then I just stopped going out around places where people were drinking a lot. But I still liked live music. I still loved hearing inspirational talks. I still love connecting with community, sharing food, all the things. And so that's where the idea of doing this event came from. And it started with just renting out a dance studio in West LA on Pico Boulevard for $50. And I was hosting this thing every week, and there was like 12 people coming. I sent out the invitation to my list of 1,000 people at the time, and none of them showed up. But one person who a friend of mine told about it brought like 8 people. So there was like 12 of us in this room. I was basically the whole Shine. I was giving the talk. I was leading the meditation. I was making the honey lemon ginger tea. I was doing the whole thing. And we were doing it on a weekly basis, and it was free. I wasn't charging anything. I was paying for it out of my pocket. And it was just a way to bring people together. And then about 5 weeks in, the woman who was helping me out, she says, you should really take up a collection to pay for the space. People are getting this for free. They're getting a lot of value. I'm sure they'll be happy to donate. And it kind of resonated. So at the 6th one, decided to, at the end of the event, say, hey guys, we're going to pass around the hat. Just drop whatever you can in the hat. And that'll give us an opportunity to kind of pay for the things that we're supplying. We collected out of, say there were 14 people there, maybe there were 20 at this point. We collected $55. So
okay.
I thought, I was a little disappointed, honestly. Even though I didn't really need the money, I just thought people would appreciate what we were doing a lot more than just $55, which is an average of what, like $2 a person.
Yeah. But you're a yoga teacher. Have you ever been to one of those yoga places where
the Brian Kest stuff? Yeah. The same thing. People drop $3, $2 after this 90-minute long experience. So I'm at home And I'm looking at this $55 and I think to myself, I could just pocket this money. No one would ever find out. Or I can give this $55 to somebody at the next event and tell them to go use it for something positive in the world, help other people.
That's right.
And so at the 7th event, at the end of the event, I said, guys, last week we raised money for the first time, $55. And there's someone here has a ticket under their chair. I want you to reach under your chair. This guy pulls out this red ticket and brought him up to the front, gave him the $55 in cash and said, go and do something to make the world a better place. I know it's not a lot of money, but the message is you don't need a lot of money to do good. So lean into your creativity and come back and tell us what you did with it. So he comes back the next week. Now we have like 20 people, maybe 22 people. He apparently put some kid through some summer arts program. He added 50 of his own dollars, and the whole thing was like, I think, $100. People were so inspired, and we raised money. And that night we raised like $150. Same number of people, but we tripled the amount of the donations. And so that started what became known as the Shine On Challenge, which became sort of like the pivotal part of the event that I credit with making the hockey stick growth happen. Because then we started getting 40 people, 60 people. We moved to larger venues, and then cut to, we're at Wanderlust on Highland Avenue.
Right.
And we have like 300 something people there.
Yeah. Yeah. That was,
2014, 15.
15. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was sort of precariously seated on the throne of Wanderlust at that juncture. And I remember that event coming in and just thinking, this is the event I kind of always wanted to create. I think I've told you that before. It was like, what is the Jimmy Fallon or the Dave Letterman event for this space?
Right.
That had music. I remember seeing, I think it was the first place I saw InQ.
Yes.
I think Trudy Goodman led a meditation. Well, you started to bring in other talent.
Well, I started being able to get bigger people because the crowds were bigger. Yeah. So we had a bunch of really cool people. Neil Strauss came and did a thing. That's
right. I remember there was a beatboxer that was insane.
Yes.
An Asian kid, I believe.
Yes.
It was like he just
so much
people.
Good talent. So much good talent came through there. And that's all the things I love. I love live music. I love comedy. We had comedy at a certain point.
That's right.
Improv. And we were giving away $400 cash to someone who won the Shine On Challenge that night. And then what was funny is so several events later after the donation thing started happening, a guy who was on the team won the Shine On Challenge. And I was so upset about that. I was like, why is he claiming this? I forget how we were choosing people, but he had put his name in the hat. Oh, that's what it was. When you registered, your name went into the thing, and then he put his name in, and he happened to be the videographer of the event. And I was upset because you want somebody who's not affiliated to win because it just seems more special. But here's what happened. He makes sandwiches and gives them out on Skid Row, right? Nothing special. I mean, that's what kind of the stock thing to do to give back.
Yep.
But he videoed it. And he brought in this beautiful video. And that's what shot it from $250, I think that's where it was at the time, to $400. We got so much money coming in because people could see it. Right. And there's power in seeing what someone does versus just hearing about it. So it ended up being the best thing that could have happened for our evolution as an event. And that's what caused it to get to that point where, we're now at Wanderlust. So it's just kind of funny how these things come together.
It's scaled all over the country. And I know you got all sorts of coverage on every major network.
Completely organically.
Yeah.
We're in the New York Times. It was profiled on the front page of the New York Times. Yeah. And the reason they were profiling it was because we were a sober event. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, oh no, this is much more than just that was just a small little component of it.
Right.
As far as I was concerned, we were really there to be philanthropic and to bring people together and blah, blah, blah. And all they wanted to talk about was how we weren't serving alcohol. But that led to a bunch of other coverage. And it was just funny because, you think back, I never imagined that's how it would have grown. Those were the things, the videographer who wasn't supposed to enter this thing, giving away money, people focusing on the non-alcoholic component. And it was a great time. It was a good 5 years.
Yeah. Well, you were following your heart.
Following my heart. All the
curious.
things. Yeah.
But the reason also why I wanted to bring it up, because I have so many fond memories of it, but also, you write about it in the book, not in that as much detail as we just unpacked it with, but so you wrote this book on spiritual minimalism.
Yeah.
Travel Light. Fantastic book. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I know it's hard to write books and get them out into the world. That gestation process is long. And so congratulations. And I was reading about the shine component. I was nostalgic and, remembering all that. But it also addressed one of the spiritual principles, or one of the principles of spiritual minimalism, which was, I can't remember which one it was. It was like number 4. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which you call give what you want. So you mentioned, you were at this place where you weren't socializing because, you weren't into alcohol, but you were also, I can't remember exactly. I think you moved to LA years before mm-hmm. that. And you didn't call yourself lonely. You called yourself sort of lonesome, mm-hmm. Which I think is an interesting delineation. But that because you were looking for community, you actually created the circumstances for community. And that was one of the principles one of the concepts that ladders up into one of these core principles, which I thought was cool.
I was also in between relationships, also known as single. And
that's true. It's probably useful.
And I ended up meeting my girlfriend at one of the Shine. She was volunteering. She started volunteering at one of the Shine events. That's how we met. Yeah. Actually, we met before, but then she was connected through someone else to volunteer. And then we really connected at the Shine event. And then that, obviously she saw me up on stage and hosting, and that gave me a certain different type of dynamic in her mind. And so that became something. And I got everything I was looking for.
There were people putting their names in the hat for light as well, not just for the 400.
But it wasn't even about that. It was just literally about bringing people together. Yeah. And so I talk about giving what you want to receive. Even more so, it's not really about money or anything like that, but it's like if you want more friends, you have to be friendly. You have to be a good friend. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to keep the friends that you have. If you want more love in your relationship, you have to be more loving. You can't wait for the other person to go first. So we have this habit and tendency in our society to wait, to ration out the thing that we think we want, because we're operating under the presumption that that things are out there and it's all transactional. And if I give it a little bit, then I should be receiving back that or probably more. Mm-hmm. And the real paradigm is you want to actually give more from the right place, right. Which is you're not doing people favors to get something back. You're doing it because you can do it, and you have a generosity of spirit. And as a byproduct of that, people can feel that. I was just talking to a buddy of mine about Alex Hormozi. A lot of people are familiar with it. Are you familiar with Alex Hormozi? Yeah. He's a big influencer. He talks a lot about, money and building businesses and stuff like that. But one of his principles is just being generous and giving things away and showing the back end of how he's doing things. And he's built up this massive audience over the last couple of years from just being so transparent, and that's just another example of the power of real generosity. People, it's attractive. It attracts to you other generous people and other people who want to help you.
Yeah. I find this to be particularly true with presents. Mm-hmm. Like, it would used to really bother me when other people weren't present with me, particularly my children, and that's cool. They're teenagers. We're sitting at the dinner table, like on the phone, underneath the table, mm-hmm. like checking texts and Snapchat, God knows what else. And I would like harp on them, we're at the dinner table, be present with your family. Like, of course, they'll never listen to me, but they never fail to imitate me, right? That's what I had to realize. And so the best way to get what I wanted, but without really any agenda, was to become more present myself. Mm. And not necessarily always with them, just in general. Mm-hmm. And, if I suspend modesty just for one brief moment, the ways that I can acknowledge where I've made progress in my own life is that I am able to be way, way more present with people. I don't feel the need to check my phone or to be anywhere else than the place that I am. And like you say, I feel that that then it is almost mutually, there's a mutual reciprocity in it, that it comes back to you when you're that way. And then you begin to attract the angels that you want to appear in your life, right? Because you attract the present people. And it's cool.
Yeah. And I talk about, how abundance is out there. We're either creating access to it or limitations to it. And, we all have been around people who are really cheap, or at least more frugal than we are. And what's interesting is you can be a generous person, and being around someone who's frugal makes you a little bit more stingy with them, because if they're always taking, you don't want to give them as much.
Right.
And so that's kind of how it works. If you're operating from scarcity, people start to kind of guard themselves against that by not either wanting to be around you, or if they are around you, they're limiting their resources so that they're not giving more than what they're getting from you, right? Yeah. And you can't control what they do for you. All you can control is how generous you are towards them, because that unlocks their own generosity. When you're generous, especially when you may not have as much as them, and they see that, it's going to unlock their own generosity and their own abundance. So you can take someone who's frugal, be generous with them, and you may see them be more generous with you than they would be otherwise with themselves or with someone else. So it's kind of a new way of perceiving life, that where you can kind of create more experiences that you want to have.
Yeah, yeah, so true. So you're a famous minimalist at this juncture, or nomad. And you've written this book that creates a really interesting delineation between sort of minimalism, sort of cutting back on clutter in your life, and then spiritual minimalism. And we can talk about the differences between those two things. But maybe just start a little bit with the background of your commitment just to kind of minimalism as it pertains to external things, and then we'll sort of migrate into spiritual minimalism. So give us a little bit of the background on that story and how you became a one bagger, as they call them.
Well, I feel like a lot of people are now, experimenting with minimalism since the pandemic, and they were sort of forced into it. I was in a 2-bedroom, beautiful apartment in Venice up until 2018, and I got this internal, I call it the heart voice. The heart voice told me to move out of that and move into a carry-on bag and just start living from that carry-on bag. And it's interesting, you and I are having this conversation because one of the assurances that I used as a way to entice myself to take the leap of faith was the fact that I had all these wanderlust.
Oh, that's right. That was that
engagements.
Summer.
That was that summer. Yeah.
Yeah.
My book, Bliss More, had just come out, and you guys, and you specifically generously offered me a bunch of engagements. I think there were probably like 18 engagements or something like that, where you were flying me all over the place.
That's right. Yeah.
And it was going to start in like May or June. And so I thought, okay, this is a perfect time to take this leap, because I'd been toying with it and percolating on it for many, many months, but I didn't know when was the right time to do it.
Wanderlust pushed you off the cliff.
Yeah, exactly. Wanderlust pushed me off the cliff.
Go now.
Yeah, like that meme of that guy falling back in the bungee jump. He's like, one more minute. Wait. So it's funny. I'm having a full circle moment right now, because I think I don't want to get into what I would have done otherwise, but that's what happened. I used it as an opportunity to launch into this new lifestyle. So that was May 31st, 2018. I rolled out of my apartment into my carry-on bag, and I wasn't doing it to tell a story. It was just something. I wasn't doing it to write a book. I was just doing it because that's what I felt called to do. And it was that same tone of insight that I had when I created The Shine, and when I became a meditation teacher, and when I left New York and moved to Los Angeles, and all the other things that were leaps of faith.
Paris or South Beach or all these other things.
Yeah, all these other leaps of faith that ended up working out in the most amazing, magical ways. So What was interesting about this time though is that I'm 45 when this goes down, and the girl I met at the Shine, she and I had just broken up, and I'm like, man, I want to have kids, I want to have a family. I'm nested, right? I'm nested. I have like a really stable life. I've got a really great, income. I'm living the dream. I'm following my heart, but this other thing is not happening in the way that I've envisioned it for myself. And I know that I'm not stupid. I know that living from a carry-on bag is not going to attract, it's not an automatic indicator for commitment and long-term stability.
Yeah.
So it was flying in the face of this thing that I've been saying that I wanted, but that's the power of, that's why they call it a leap of faith. Right. They don't call it a leap of certainty. And I think a lot of times we look for certainty and we try to keep one toe on the ground with the other foot in the air and call that, but that's not a proper leap of faith. A leap of faith is both feet have to leave the ground. You have to be gaining momentum. There's a part of you that's going to be scared as hell. You don't know when or how the net is going to appear. You just trust that it is going to appear. And so I don't have a part of the story where I end up meeting my soulmate and all that, but it's still kind of playing out. But that's what it is. So that's when it started, and it's been beautiful. It's been a beautiful, sometimes messy adventure. And it ended up culminating in this book, Travel Light, that was about what I'm now referring to as spiritual minimalism, which I credit with the sort of internal mechanisms for allowing me to do that in the first place. Right. Because I want to inspire other people not to live from a carry-on bag or backpack, but to find their version of that, following their heart into the direction of something that is not quite as certain as they want it to be.
Yeah, establishing or cultivating that trust in that inner voice. It's funny, it's in Chinese, there's a word called mushin, which is the non-deliberative heart mind, or it's kind of like kokoro in Japanese, I believe, more or less. And it's not the cognitive mind, it's the heart mind. So it's not like there's no there's no refinement there, but it is a trusting of the internal voice that I think we often don't follow that. We're scared. There's a lot of fear there.
Yeah.
And you set off on this journey. Now, I think before we kind of probe the principles of spiritual minimalism, I'd be remiss if I didn't kind of poke at a few things. So I know people are also curious about this, about some of the items that you actually carry around with you, because if you have a limited set, and there's one comment that you say, if you have a 40-inch bag, you're going to fill 40 inches. If you got 22 inches, you're going to fill the 22 inches. If you got a backpack, you're always going to fill it. And you've continued to downsize. So obviously there are, essentials that you bring, and some people could probably guess basic clothing and stuff like that are interesting. But what are some of the other elements of the kind of components that you bring with you that sort of then bridge into the spiritual part of your life?
Yeah. So I guess one thing, just to give a little more context, I had a 22-inch carry-on bag to start with, because that was the largest bag that they allow in the overhead compartment of most airlines. And obviously, you want to get as much as you can into it if that's all you're going to be living from for an indefinite amount of time. And what I realized is that I had too much stuff after rolling around that carry-on bag for 6 or 7 months. And I had too much stuff because I was asking myself the wrong question. And this is something just like the Shine On Challenge, I couldn't have anticipated until I started living this lifestyle. The question I was asking was, how much stuff can I fit into the bag just in case? And the question I started to ask is, how much do I actually use? How much do I actually need? And because the other reason that I felt I had too much stuff is because literally I was carrying everything I own around with me everywhere I was going. And I was traveling at that point every week or every couple of weeks. sometimes every few days. And so it's just a lot to have to carry that stuff around all over the place. And people who hike the Pacific Crest Trail, which is that trail from Mexico to Canada, takes 6 months to do it. They talk about shaving down their toothbrush because they just don't need that other half of the toothbrush. It weighs too much. And if you're carrying everything you own with you for 6 months, every day, 22 miles a day, you don't need, you're like, I don't need this other pair of underwear. I don't need, And so I started feeling a little bit like that, like I'm carrying too much stuff and I need to pare down. And at the same time, I'm giving talks, I'm presenting at Wanderlust events, I'm on panels, I'm doing some keynotes. I've got a podcast that I started a little later than that. So I'm carrying around my podcast microphone and equipment. And so my bag is kind of occupied, like well over half my bag is occupied with that stuff to look professional, to not look disheveled like I'm living out of a backpack. I didn't want to look like I was living out. Plus I'm going on dates, So I think what would surprise people the most is that the largest item that I have by far in my bag is this meditation puja kit with the trays and bowls and rice and camphor and sandalwood powder and candles. And it takes up like about 1/4 of the whole bag. And
that's like 25% of the possessions,
a quarter of the real estate
taking around.
Yeah.
And people might say, I might reserve that for, an extra 3 pair of underwear, but no.
But that's something that I have used and still use to initiate people into this meditation training that I have been doing for a very long time. Yeah. And without that, I wouldn't have the type of perspective I have. I wouldn't have the type of relationship I have with my lifestyle, and I wouldn't be as useful as I'm moving around. Because it's not just about moving around and chilling, and being comfortable.
Yeah.
It's about using my gifts and my talents, the ones that still align with me and resonate with me to the best of my ability to help make the world a better place. And so that's a part of the deal, is still doing that and helping people in those ways. And so I just fit whatever else I can fit around that I actually use. But the big game changer came a couple years in when I broke down and learned how to hand wash my clothes.
Yeah.
Which I never really understood. I would try before and it would take 5 days for a pair of underwear to dry completely. So there was something I wasn't doing correctly. And I went on YouTube, which is something I would do often to learn things. And I learned how to wash my clothes at night and have them dry by the morning by just air drying, and do it anywhere I was, hotels, bedroom, inns, wherever I was staying. And so I perfected that process. I actually have that in the book. It's a bullet point instruction to show you how to do that. But it all ends up turning into this like little meditation. And that's one of the things I realized, is that as an extension of my just daily meditation practice, which I probably also helps to inform like what I do next or how I do it, everything that I do as a part of that lifestyle becomes a sort of meditation. And you start to really embody this idea that the journey is the destination.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, I think about it sometimes. So I'm a faster.
Mm-hmm.
I intermittent fasting. So I'm on a regular daily 16/8 protocol.
What are your times?
So 11 to 7, more or less.
Okay.
If I really got my act together, I'd move it earlier in the day for a whole bunch of different reasons, but it's not particularly very friendly to do that. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm not neurotic about it. I play around the edges of it. It was very difficult at first. Now it's second nature. I made the conscious unconscious, which is part of the game here. But one of the keys for me along that journey was being able to delineate between a biological need and a psychological desire. Mm. And in some ways, that just the cultivation of that ability to witness and separate those things has many applications well beyond food. For me, it started with food. But, do I have a biological need to check Instagram? Or is that a psychological craving? Well, that one's pretty easy. But like for example, with the amount of clothes that you have in your bag. Do you have a need for more clothes than you have? No, not really, right? Sometimes we have psychological cravings, and it's almost the refinement of that skill can take you a long way.
Yeah, I've kind of adopted more of a hunter-gatherer approach.
Yeah.
In terms of what I wear, meaning, right now it's summertime as we're recording this. We're in August, so the things that I have in my bag are mostly summertime apparel. But if I was here in the winter, and then I was going to be going to New York after this, which I going back to Mexico or back to LA or whatever, I would just get rid of the coat. So I kind of get what I need for that period of time, depending on how long I'm going to be in an area, and then I'll just shed it when I don't need it anymore, or donate it or gift it or something like that.
One of the other things that I love that you tote around, and you mentioned this in the book, is some nice note paper. And I knew in a journal. I don't know if that's in the journal or connected to the. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Yeah.
And you
just like blank journal paper.
Got it. And you've developed a particular skill with paper.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
origami.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought that was such a cool little practice. Can you talk about that for a second?
Well, Michael James Wong, and which is a book that I still think about and refer to. I would say it's one of the most useful books I've ever read, actually. The power, the sweetest word in any language is the sound of someone saying your name.
Yeah.
And so, if we could just be more intentional about that, and especially if someone has a name that's hard to pronounce, a lot of times I like to ask, how do you spell it, or what are some ways that you help people remember your name, like when you go to Starbucks or something, because people with difficult names oftentimes have word associations for their name.
Yeah.
And so that's a great time to write it down. And so you just have that with you. And that could make the difference in this becoming a very deep relationship versus just some transactional thing. You met this person once, you'd barely remember them. And because they'll remember you, if you remember their name and you pronounce it correctly, they'll absolutely remember you.
Yeah. Skylar and I just finished leading a retreat, and you were kind enough to come up and participate in some of it. And we have an opening circle at the retreat where it's kind of a very kind of vulnerable sharing moment. And the first couple of times we did these retreats, everyone would get into sort of a semicircle, and we would just like go around the circle somewhat linearly or concentrically. But what I started to notice was that people weren't listening because they were so worried about what they were going to say, and they could see when they were next. So I was like, no, we got to get away from that. So I thought about, okay, instead of that, we can still sit in a circle, but people, before we start the share, I'm going to go around and have everyone write their name down, and then with their spiritual vegetable. So essentially, like if they were reincarnated as a vegetable, what would it be? Cauliflower, or some people pick very, very bespoke ones that I've never heard of. Some people are more kind of down the middle, and then we put it into a hat, and then I just pick it out of the hat, and it'll be like Amanda Broccoli, and so it's a nice way to kind of break up the sort of linearity of the share. And then people are more present because they're sort of like, I could get picked now, I could get picked at the end, whatever, just let go. Don't worry about it. But for me, what it ended up being was like a mnemonic device where I end up remembering people's names because I'm like, oh yeah, that's Angela Carrot. Carrot. She's the carrot girl. Angela Carrot, something. Anyways. Very silly technique.
But it helps though, really. I do the same thing on my retreats. We do some sort of word association with names, and people remember them within an hour. All 30 people's names, which is pretty incredible to witness.
Totally. That's sweet. So there's the principles of spiritual minimalism. We've kind of talked about a couple of those, and we'll get into more of the 7 of them that you outlined. And then there's the practices. So we talked about some of the practices. Kind of leaving places better than that you found them. I love that one.
And the exercise for that part of the book is when you go to a public bathroom, you leave it better than you found it. So if there's trash and paper towels and stuff on the floor, you get all that and put it in the wastebasket and leave it as though your personal idol is going to use it after you.
Yeah, I love that.
It's symbolic.
Like, what if Roger Federer comes in here to take a poop next? He just wants everything proper and set. He's one of my heroes. But and then there was a concept in there around one of the practices that I had never heard of before, and I love it. I've heard of the general idea, but I never heard of the word, which was flaneuring. Yeah. What is flaneuring?
Flaneuring is an 18th century French aristocratic term for aimless walking. So apparently, back in the 18th century, people of means didn't have to work. It was a way of sort of showing, I don't really have to go to work all day long. So instead, I'm going to go out for a walk with no destination in mind except for the act of walking itself. Now, obviously, you have to have some, like, I'm going to walk my neighborhood, I'm going to walk, but you're basically walking with the flexibility of deviating from whatever the beaten path is and allowing yourself a little room to follow your curiosity if you want to go down this particular street or check out this park or walk into this store or, engage in this particular activity. And it's a way of just really immersing yourself in whatever environment. And the thinking is that when you do that and you make a habit of it, you begin to notice things that you would not have noticed otherwise. You begin to have beautiful small moments that you probably would have missed. Kind of like that, that Washington Post experiment that they did back in 2007 where they brought so there was a musician in the L'Enfant Plaza metro station in DC playing the violin, and I think within 45 minutes only 2 or 3 people stopped to watch this person who was playing this violin, and most of those were kids, It was great during rush hour, and at the end of 45 minutes, he counted up, I think, $17 and change that people had dropped into his violin case. And this was one of the most acclaimed violinists in the world, Joshua Bell.
Oh, really?
Have you heard about this?
Of course. I know who Joshua Bell is, but
they had Joshua Bell in the subway station performing in the morning during rush hour. He had only made $17.
Oh, man.
Thousands of people had passed by him. And what was interesting is 4 days before, he was performing at the Boston Symphony Orchestra for $100 a minute.
Wow.
Packed house. But in an unlikely place at an unlikely time, some journalist at Washington Post wanted to see if people would pay attention if there was beauty present. And apparently most very smart, very studied, very cultured people just raced right by him. And the only people who noticed were the children. Children would stop and pay attention, and then they would get yanked along by their parent. And so the question that the journalist poses at the end of the article is, if we're missing, this person playing on this $3 million violin, the most intricate pieces ever written in music history, what else are we missing? Yeah. And that's what flaneuring is about. It's about just being present to whatever is happening around you.
Yeah. And I think we can all relate to that feeling of going for a hike or something, picking up a stick and banging a stump with it and just looking around, and you come across a little stream that has a tiny little whirlpool, and you sit there and stare at it. And the whole thing feels like purposelessness, or, purposeless, basically. It actually reminds me, there's another kind of Japanese aesthetic term known as yugen, which is the etymology is Chinese. And it kind of means dark. It's one of those untranslatable, it means dark. Yu means dark. Gen means dark. You're okay. But really the best translation is to walk into the woods with no intention of return. Just to go and wander and be, and see what arises. We used to go out to the lake and just skip stones. What for? I don't know. Watch the boats go around the dog leg. Where were they going?
Yeah, and it sounds very frivolous, when you look at modern day productivity metrics, but you got to remember that's also Eckhart Tolle's story. He went out in Vancouver to this park bench for 2 years or something like that. It was either a year or 2 years. And he just sat on the park bench all day long and just watched the birds. And obviously all of his family and friends thought he was completely nuts, because they're going to work.
Yeah.
And he's going to the park, but he's living off of them. And so that creates some friction and some tension in these relationships. But throughout that process of sitting on that bench and observing nature, he starts developing the concepts for what became the Power of Now, which obviously has become one of the most pivotal spiritual texts ever written. And he's now I think number 2 in that list of the most influential and prominent spiritual teachers in the world.
Yeah, well, I think we often tend to associate a purposeful life with something that exists out there in the future that we're going to chase.
Yeah.
And really the process, what do you say? The journey is the thing, and in some ways we have to kind of release this notion of I'm going to chase this thing out there, which then will be my full fulfillment of my great potential, and that will then represent the meaning in my life. When really all we're only ever here and now. You can't be happy in the future.
Yeah, and just to kind of put a bow on it, this topic, if the idea of aimless walking seems too frivolous to sell to your friends and your family, You want to maybe reframe it as I'm going to go practice following my heart. I'm going to practice listening to my inner guidance. And if my inner guidance says go to the left, I'm going to go to the left. Obviously in a safe, you don't do this through the hood or through the favela, but if you're in a safe area and something internally says to, go into the shop or say hi to this person or help this person across the street or stop and smell the roses, just follow it and see what happens. And that's how you turn the volume up on that heart voice that I talk about.
It goes to 11. It doesn't just go to 10. There's another principle that I found to be very poignant. I just want to read it so I just get it right, which was no throwaway moments. So can you unpack that a little bit, and then I'll share a little bit of what that struck with me.
Sure. I'll tell a story just to illustrate what I mean by no throwaway moments, and then we can talk about the mechanics of it. So years ago, back when I was just teaching yoga here in Los Angeles, I had a class one morning. It was like every Wednesday, every Friday, 10 o'clock in the morning in West Hollywood. And I used to live in West Hollywood, about 10 minutes away from the class. So I had my commute all timed out. And I'm a very punctual person. I like being on time, and that's a whole other story. But as you saw coming here, I was giving you the update. My ETA is such and such, and
right on time. And so anyways, I leave within,
at the beginning of the time I always left, which was like 15 minutes before. There was never any traffic. And for some reason, when I turned on the Fountain Avenue, there was all this bumper to bumper traffic. You know Fountain Avenue well. So like any good Los Angeles driver, I zigzag my way down to Santa Monica Boulevard because that's going in the same direction. It runs parallel to Fountain Avenue, bumper to bumper traffic. So I'm like, what is going on? Is the president in town? Why is there all this traffic? I'm obviously going to be late now. This is before smartphones, so I couldn't FaceTime the place where I was going and tell them or anything like that. I was just going to be late. And so I get to Fairfax, right? And then the traffic just starts to spontaneously clear up. And as I'm going through the intersection, I'm looking for what the cause of this disruption was. I'm looking for an accident. I'm looking for construction. I don't see anything. There's nobody in the streets going, out of their mind. So I'm just late now. I'm like 10 minutes late to this class. And I get to the class and everybody's huddled into the back of the room, and I'm wearing my little flip-flops because I'm teaching, and I can feel crunching under my feet. And I look down and there's all these shards of glass all over the ground. And I look up, and in the middle of the front wall, the whole front wall was a panel of mirrors. The middle panel had dislodged and came crashing down 10 minutes before I arrived, right when the class was supposed to start. And guess where I would have been sitting to start the class? In meditation, right in front of that mirror. So it turns out that phantom traffic jam that I was cursing was actually sparing me from having a very unlucky start to my day.
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean by no throwaway moments. It's when you're doing your best and you've tried everything, you've gone to the other street, tried to go over and above and beyond the traffic, and it's not happening. Trust that you're being divinely guided in some way that you may not understand, that's sparing you from something worse happening than you just being late or whatever the other equivalent of that is when you're not meeting whatever expectation you have. And that just allows you to be more present to what is.
Absolutely. And also refrain from assigning advantage or disadvantage to any particular situation, because you don't know the serendipity of chains of causal events. You know, I mean, we've all probably had that experience of, like the yellow light turning red right before, we get to the intersection, and, you feel this kind of like little wave of frustration, but oh shit, there's the car in front of you just got hit by another car or something. So
That's right.
there's so many, life is so multilinear in that way. Alan Watts has this absolutely hilarious, wonderful parable about the Chinese farmer. I'll put it in the notes, but essentially there's an old kind of stoic Chinese farmer who doesn't assign advantage or disadvantage to anything, and he loses a horse and everyone pities him, and then it comes back, and then everyone celebrates. His son takes it out into the pasture and breaks his leg, and everyone pities him, and then the army comes to conscript all the kids, and they pass his son over, and everyone celebrates. You know, it's like, and he just sits there the whole time being like, you know.
Yeah, let it keep playing out and let the camera keep rolling, as my friend says, and see what happens. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You know, this piece of the book reminded me of another kind of stoic meditation or contemplation, really, called present moment nostalgia. Mm-hmm. So we generally kind of have this wistfulness for past events. And we look back and like to some unrecoverable time, and we think, oh God, like those were the good old days back then, you know, back at those days of the shine, those were the good old days, light, you know. But what this contemplation does is really turns that around and says, no, these are the good old days. This moment right here, where I'm just absolutely present with Light Watkins, thinking or doing anything else. These are the good old days. And that can be applied to so many circumstances. Sitting there with, you know, in the car with my children or my daughter, taking her to dance, just hearing her yap at me nonstop, like about her dance, and just be like, you know, God, man, my beautiful little 13-year-old daughter, she's so enthusiastic about this. She's effervescent and effusive, and she just wants to tell her dad about it. Just, these are the good old days, man. Just be here now, you know? And I mean, Thich Nhat Hanh has the great poem, like, you know, when you wash the dishes, right? So when that piece of the book really brought up all those thoughts for me.
I love that present moment nostalgia, because it's true. You know, the thing is, when you look back at the sentimental moments of your life, you probably weren't all that present back then either. But the residue of that time stuck to those moments in a way that makes you reflect fondly on them. And so again, treating life as though there are no throwaway moments. This is the future in the making as well. This is going to be the good old days 5 years from now, what we're experiencing here. You know, remember back when we were in your little podcast studio, you know, off Laurel Canyon, and you know, and just I showed up and there was no cell service, and you know, we had to figure out when I arrived and you came out, you know, all these little things that may seem like little minor inconveniences are going to construct those good old days that we're going to reflect back on fondly. And the more present we can be, the more we'll be able to have a steady stream of these good old days leading right up to whatever moment you happen to be in right now. And I think that is the invitation for all of us. Whatever you're experiencing right now as you're listening to this or watching this, that's going to become the good old days for you one day. And especially if it's a little bit hard or challenging, you're going to reflect back on this as, you know, this is what helped to propel me to whatever the next phase of your life is going to ultimately become.
But so much of modern culture seems to be about avoiding inconvenience or providing convenience, right?
Yeah.
So many comforts. You know, I often associate that with physiology. So we have abundance of food. We never experience any scarcity. We have abundance of access to entertainment. So we never experience any darkness. We always have light, etc. And all in the name of comfort. But it's actually these comforts that are actually creating a lot of downstream disease. But it's also, there's a psychological and mental component to this too. And one of the principles that you espouse is to become comfortable with that discomfort, right?
Yeah, you know, something occurred in my life many, many years ago when I was living in New York City that really changed the way I look at discomfort, right? So I've gone through phases of my life where I've given up a lot of things. I've given up meat. I eat meat now, but there was a time when I didn't eat it for a very long stretch of time. I've been celibate for periods of time. I have given up sugar. I even gave up cooked foods at certain points. I fasted many, many times in my life. But the thing that I found the hardest, even harder than things like alcohol, all these things, the thing that I found the hardest to go without, even for 5 minutes, was chapstick, lipstick, lip balm, lip balm.
That's not what I was expecting.
Exactly. And there was a point in my life in the late 90s, where I used to carry around 3 different tubes of lip balm at all times, because if I didn't have it to apply every 5 minutes or so, I just couldn't be present with wherever I was. And of course, one day I misplaced all 3 of them, and it just took me out of the moment so much that I thought, I just can't do this anymore. This is robbing me. This little thing is robbing me of my ability to just be here now. So I resolved to break the lip balm addiction. I didn't know how long it was going to take, but I just went cold turkey. And, I'd done some research, and it's probably changed these days, but back then it was all beeswax. No matter what type of lip balm you had, beeswax was the ingredient. And if there was beeswax, your lips would be moist for a little period of time, but then it actually dries the lips out, apparently. And then petroleum jelly is like the worst in terms of drying the lips out. So I just resolved to go cold turkey, and it took me 30 days of no lip balm at all, which was mild torture for me, before my lips started to naturally moisturize themselves. And so I was liberated. I'd emancipated myself from this little thing that was like $2 that had such control over my life. And so, but it was very insightful too, because then I'm like, okay, well, what else is controlling me that is seemingly insignificant? And so things like, this is many years later when I started practicing the spiritual minimalism, things like losing luggage, or not having light in the bathroom to shave my hair, or not being able to go to the gym and feeling like, something is off. And so I started using these little inconveniences as ways to find comfort in discomfort. So I learned how to shave my head with no light. I would shave it in the dark. And then I would learn how to, like I say, hand wash my clothes. So
and you came out all right.
Yeah.
You came out all right.
So I could cut down on carrying things. And so, not ever having to check a bag. And I would learn how to exercise, do any kind of exercise for any part of the body, from just using a band or just using my body weight. And, things like that. They're small things, but it's enough to keep you present. And that's what I found to be the richer experience. Instead of allowing myself to get yanked out of the moment because things didn't go my way for 5 minutes, what are some real world workarounds for these things? And these are my versions of the work exercise, being able to present myself in a certain way, being able to wash my clothes by hand without, what if I don't have an iron and I have an important event to go? How am I going to handle that situation? So working out little, hacks for all these situations where it's just a way of me confronting the things that already I know they bother me, and how can I find ways around these so I can stay as present as possible with whatever I'm doing. And so that's, again, something I encourage people to do in finding comfort in discomfort. And one of the exercises that I use to do this is the resting squat.
Yeah.
The resting
squat.
This
is where you've had a huge influence on me.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Because I know that you do this even before reading the book. And this was very difficult for me.
Sure.
Very, very difficult. Of course, I've spent my life mostly sitting in the comfort of a chair, right? And that's had tightened my hips. I also have a hip replacement that I got when I was pretty young because I had hip dysplasia. But I was like, I got to get hip to, no pun intended, to squatting. And it's made a huge difference on my knees.
Me too.
Yeah.
I used to have all the snap, crackle, pop when I would bend my knees, and now that's all gone just from doing 5 minutes of resting squat.
And of course, this is how we were designed.
Yeah, of course.
You
Yeah.
know,
if you go to any old world cultures, that's
Right.
what they're doing. The guys are sitting on the corner in a resting squat with each other, talking, catching up, gossiping, and that kind of thing. And it's one of the most beneficial stretches that we can do. So if you don't have time to take a whole yoga class, sit in a resting squat for 5 minutes, watch a 5-minute long YouTube video or listen to a song. And then
I have to usually put like a piece of wood behind because I can't get my
your
heels all the
heels.
way down.
Yeah.
It's getting better now.
Yeah.
But that was a hack.
Yeah.
For me.
Sitting on a low table or yoga block is good. And then eventually working your way down to maybe putting something under your heels and then eventually just doing it with your feet on the ground, maybe spread wide apart. But yeah, it's a progression but it's such a beneficial thing to do. And it's kind of addictive too, actually. It starts feeling good after a while.
I know. Now I just I
like it.
I go down into it. People are kind of looking at me like, what?
Yeah.
Guy taking a shit or having a baby or what is he doing here? What's he doing?
Right,
I'm like, no, just squatting.
Yeah.
I just read this book by Peter Attia. He's a doctor.
Yeah.
And he's also into rucking.
Oh, okay.
Which is essentially,
backpacks.
just carrying more weight on you and walking up hills. It's pretty simple idea.
He's pretty, he's pretty hardcore. You know?
He's hardcore.
Swimming across the Catalina and that kind of thing. And
Yeah. But this one was just so simple.
Yeah.
I just have it here at my house with groceries.
Yeah.
It's basically rucking because I have to go up 90 steps. But yeah, just simple things like that. Of course, then there's also the more cognitive challenges. So like a few years ago, I got interested in interviewing doctors on the podcast. And so, I'm so risk of potential embarrassment. I was like, I have to do so much research on neuroscience this week. I read all these books. I read all this primary source data and clinical data. And I was like, there would be a sentence and I wouldn't know 90% of the words in the sentence. And I'd be like, oh man, this is really uncomfortable for me. And then, I keep reading and then I look some things up and now I know about 50% of the words, fast forward another year. Oh, I know maybe 75% of the words. And now when I go into research like that, the moment that I feel frustration or discomfort, there's like a little part of me that gets excited. I'm like, this is an opportunity here. I don't know this, but I'm curious about it and I want to, lean into it. So I became comfortable with it. And then of course, once you become comfortable with it, you have to keep pushing yourself over those walls. But it's a great habit to get into. Talk to me about the freedom of choicelessness. So this was the 7th principle of spiritual minimalism in the book. And there's something anachronistic immediately about that. What do you mean freedom and choicelessness seem to be at odds with each other? But what's going on there?
Yeah, so in the West, we have this idea that the more options I have, the better. So we strive to have as many options as possible. And that's one of the reasons why we try to achieve our way to happiness, because we feel like if I'm materially successful, then I have more options. More options for my kids and where they want to go to school, more options on where I can live and how controlled my environment can be, and more options on who I date, and more options on what the jobs that I get offered and things like that. And in the Eastern traditions, it's less about having external options and more about developing or cultivating a state of awareness that makes you realize which of those many options is most aligned with your heart, your intuition, your inner guidance. And this presupposes that you have a path, you have a purpose here in this plane of existence for this particular lifetime. And that when you're on that path, you are going to be able to, at some point be in service to other people. And that's going to create a sense of internal fulfillment. And you're going to be able to give back in a way that helps to use all of the life experiences that you've had up until that point. And if you're not doing that, you can have all the money in the world. You can go to the best schools. You can be in the rooms with the highest status people, but you'll still feel a bit like you're not being authentic. And And so the quickest way to live a more authentic life is to start making choices, your most important decisions based on your heart and not on external factors. In which case you have to tune in to that heart voice, which is why I list that as the number one principle. Tune into the heart voice. And then freedom of choicefulness is the last principle, because that assumes you've done all the rest of the work, in which case you'll have a better sense of what's aligned with your internal guidance and what's not aligned. And so there's freedom to that, because you don't have to spend your time deliberating on if I should take this job or that job or this other job. There's one job or one work opportunity that is aligned, and then there's everything else. And the aligned thing may not be the highest salary option, but there's a cost to taking a job that pays a lot, but it sucks your soul. So the highest salary on paper may actually be the lowest salary spiritually. And the lower salary on paper may actually be the higher salary spiritually. And I would argue that if you take the higher spiritual salary, that's going to end up paying dividends in ways you can't even imagine for yourself now down the line, that may culminate in you having some opportunities you can't even imagine either for yourself. That would actually pay more externally than the higher paying soul sucking job.
Yeah. I think that getting clear on the nature of your highest principles and then living in alignment with them, and then making that an unconscious behavior such that you're eliminating the optionality. Like, for example, you give this example in the book. I thought it was very simple and very powerful. If you're like, I am just going to be truthful. That is a principle for me that I am unwavering about. And I'm going to commit to living in alignment with truthfulness, such that that becomes sort of an unconscious behavior. Yeah. And in a way, you're limiting your options. You're saying, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to be a mendacious person. But that there's freedom in that.
There is, because you don't have to sit there and deliberate. Should I tell the truth now? Or
yeah. And then people know you as a truthful person. And then, and so, I mean, for me, when I read this, I conflated it very much with my relationship. So I've been with my wife for 35 years. Commitment is often framed within the parentheses of sacrifice, of limitation, of like what you have to give up. Oh, you can't see any other women, and there's all these logistics associated with it and all this other kind of stuff. But for me, that unconditional allegiance that I share with Skylar, my wife, has allowed me to go out and like take all sorts of crazy madcap risks and pursue dreams and start businesses and fail over and over again, knowing that there's this like pillow to comfort my fall. And in that situation, or through that lens, commitment has always been liberation or freedom for me. And I think if you can commit to living in alignment with those highest principles, there's a lot of liberation and freedom in there. But it's not always instinctual. But I thought it was beautifully crafted.
Yeah, Nick Saban, Coach Saban, the Alabama football coach, says something that just really resonated with me. He says, when I'm coaching the guys, I try to get them to practice not until they get it right, but until they can't get it wrong. And there's freedom to that. Because then you don't have to worry, am I going to get it wrong now? Because you've put in the time and the effort. And I think that's really the takeaway message from this work is none of the stuff is necessarily going to be easy, but the more we can process, we can create processes and systems for the little things and turn everything that we can into little mini meditations, the more we can embody this stuff. And it's through embodying it that you free yourself up from having to decide if you're going to do the right thing today, decide if you're going to tell the truth today, decide if you're going to take the job that pays more but sucks your soul, and instead you just kind of, you're on more of a mission. You're more mission driven with everything. Everything is a mission. Washing the dishes is a part of your mission. Sweeping out the driveway is a part of your mission. Stopping and smelling the flowers is a part of your mission, because you're following something that's bigger than whatever you're trying to achieve externally.
So I think you intuited where I was going. and and sort of ending with the beginning on some level, because the upstream foundation, if you will, of a lot of these principles and practices that we're talking about really is meditation. And that's, of course, at the core of your teaching and at the core of your life and your practice. So maybe you could just for a moment describe kind of your relationship with meditation. And then also in the book, and I thought this was so helpful, you laid out kind of the most minimal, clear, simple approach to meditation. And I think that would be really helpful for people to hear, because I think a lot of people sort of have a relationship with meditation that's a little mangy. They know it's something that's good for them, but they can't quite get their arms around it.
Yeah. Yeah. I say all of my books at their core are meditation books, with some other themes sprinkled in. So this one has minimalism themes, and the last one has inspiration, and there was one with happiness. But the core practices are always, get still, get quiet. And the reason why I'm such a big advocate for it is because it's benefited my own life, massively. We probably wouldn't be having this conversation right now if I hadn't started really investing in my meditation practice back in 2003 when I met my teacher and went all in on it, and it changed so much. And people often ask, what's the biggest benefit you got from meditation? Because what's interesting about my story is I didn't come to meditation from some rock bottom moment. I came to it through following curiosity, which I talk about in the book. Yeah. And I never considered myself to be a particularly stressed out person. And I see a lot of people saying, when the subject comes up about meditation, I don't need meditation. I'm not stressed. I sleep well at night and all that. And that was my experience too. So when I look at what I've gotten from meditation that I think is valuable to pretty much everybody is a stronger connection to my intuition. And so that has freed me up from having to sit there and, deliberate about things. And most of what our intuition is pointing us toward are hard things. Go work out even though you don't feel like it. Eat the healthier option even though you'd rather have the donuts and the fries. Apologize first even though they're at fault,
not that one. Damn it.
Yeah. So
I could deal with the fries, but apologies.
Exactly. Whatever your thing is that you're holding back, your intuition you have a stronger connection to it. It'll turn from a still small voice that you can barely hear into a loud, annoying voice, and you won't be able to ignore it. And what you find is that when you follow through on it more often than not, your life ends up better than it would have been otherwise when you were trying to stand your ground against this situation that was really about protecting your ego. Yeah. And so it exposes our blind spots. I relate meditation to Wonder Woman's lasso. Do you know the power of Wonder Woman's lasso, the superpower?
No, it's not invisibility.
No, it's a truth serum.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
You can't lie if you have that lasso around you. And meditation's like that. It's really hard to BS yourself if you've been meditating on a daily basis.
I've got to hide Skylar's lasso.
So, you talk about being honest and all that. And obviously, it could be a very deliberate, intentional thing, or you can just meditate. And the idea to lie will be so painful that you just won't allow yourself to do it. Like you kind of have to do it and accept whatever consequences come as a result of that. And it's that old adage, the truth shall set you free, And when we talk about truth, we can talk about also living in authenticity with your heart and what's in integrity with what you're feeling internally. And so all that makes you free. And that's what causes you to not hold on to things so tightly externally that you think you need to identify or define who and what you truly are, when who and what you truly are is really that spiritual essence that in your finest hour is the thing that propels you to stand up to injustice and to help and truly protect the vulnerable people around you and be generous in spirit and all the things that we want to be deep down. And when we go to movies and we see the main character being these ways, after overcoming some obstacle, it makes us tear up because we identify with that aspect in ourselves. But it's just so hard to do it IRL, in real life.
That's right.
And so meditation is the key domino in that regard. You can do all these things without meditation, and you can look throughout history at the most iconic figures of change and revolution: the Martin Luther Kings, the Malcolm X's, the Gandhis. They've all, we won't put Gandhi. Gandhi was a meditator, but everyone, you can make significant change without a meditation practice. But there is always some sort of side effect when you don't have a release valve, right? So in King's case, King was manic depressive. He was a chain smoking, philandering, human, doing his best, but he had to have these outlets because he was living life under the constant threat of death. And you look at anyone else's life close enough, read their biographies, there was always some dirty outlet for the stress that you're under when you're truly living an authentic life. And I consider meditation to be like a clean outlet, a really clean release valve, where the only side effects are you get happier, you get more fulfilled, you sleep better at night, et cetera, et cetera. So I like to try to encourage people to at least consider adopting that as a foundational practice, because it's going to allow you to do all the other things you already want to do better.
Yeah. I mean, you say that a practice can sharpen your intuition. I think oftentimes meditation really addresses one's respective sort of Achilles heel. It is so protean in its utility, where for example, for me, where it was most useful is finding and cultivating that space between stimulus and response. So there's the famous Viktor Frankl quote, between stimulus and response, there is a space. Within that space lies your liberation. I was a very kind of trigger happy person for a big chunk of my life. Something would happen and I would be something political, or I'd get something, an email, and immediately I'd want to respond, or react really. And I found that as I developed a practice, it was more okay. And I began to be able to assess events for the nature of the event itself without lopping a lot of judgment on it and having an immediate emotional response. And that's been very profitable for my life.
I've given myself a 24-hour moratorium on reacting to emails, text messages, things that would normally kind of rub me the wrong way.
Yeah.
And just no matter how badly I want. And sometimes I'll actually sit up and draft out the email that I would send back right away. The Scud missile I would fire back in their direction, but I won't send it. I'll wait 24 hours and I'll revisit it then. And if I don't have 24 hours, I'll meditate first. I'll write it out, then meditate and go back, and you always change it. You always come back from a more compassionate place.
Every time.
And it just helps you put yourself in that other person's shoes a lot more and see the experience more objectively than subjectively, in which case you can probably glean insights around how they could have come up with that perspective, and then do the mature thing, which is, taking responsibility. And giving what you want to receive. Obviously you want people to take responsibility when you have conflict. So give that, even if they can't see that it's their fault, you're engaged with them. So at the end of the day, it's your fault.
Yeah. At the beginning of the book, you talk about sort of de-excitation. So it made me think of this wonderful Alan Watts quote. He says, "As the ocean waves, the universe peoples." So a wave is an individual expression of the ocean, and but then it diffuses back into the body of something bigger, something greater than itself. And we often associate what it's like to be a self with the wave, not the universe. And I'd never thought about it this way, but you started to talk about stillness and de-excitation as a means for the wave disappearing or kind of diffusing back into the ocean. It's beautiful.
Remembering its oceanic status. Yeah.
Right.
So that's what it's doing. It's remembering itself.
Yeah.
And then when it comes back into the individual expression, it brings some of that remembrance with it. Maybe not on a conscious level, but there's something deep down that makes it feel more connected to the moment, to other people, to situations and circumstances that it may otherwise judge as not being useful or obstacles to their path. And when you can reframe it from the inside out, which is the basis of spiritual minimalism, it gives you more presence to be able to move through it with more efficiency and to glean insights along the way.
Yeah. And when you feel connected to something greater than yourself, compassion and collective joy, all these things start to emerge as almost barometers for your progress in a way. You can notice them. You're like, oh yeah, I used to not identify someone else's pain or joy as my own, and now I do a little bit more. So there are these little cues that we can notice as we progress. So to anyone that believes they have to wear a saffron robe and rake pea gravel for eternity to be a meditator, can you unravel that concept for people? And you do break it down into these 10 steps. I actually have them written down. Okay. If you want to take very briefly, people, I'll give them to you just if you need.
Ask you that because I don't remember them by heart. So the 10 steps to I call it the minimalist approach to meditation. It's very simple. So I say early in the day, sit with comfortable back support and set a gentle alarm, 15 minutes to 20 minutes, and then close your eyes. And then you can start with 3 deep breaths just to relax your body, and then let your breathing return to normal. And here's the real key here, okay? This is where people's meditation can go off the rails if they don't do this. You want to maintain a friendly attitude with all of your thoughts. So, in other words, you don't have to notice your thoughts. You don't have to let go of your thoughts. All you're doing is you're adopting a friendly attitude towards the thoughts that you would otherwise shame. I call it thought shaming in my book, Bliss More, which is simply, beating yourself up over having certain thoughts and not other thoughts. A lot of people think when I'm meditating, I should be thinking about the fact that I'm meditating, as well as thinking about waterfalls and rainbows and being in the white light and all of that. And what I'm suggesting with adopting this friendly attitude about your thoughts is that even if you're thinking about your favorite spaghetti recipe or a conversation or to-do list or some goal you may have, or something not so nice that happened to you a year ago or 5 years ago, to not look at those thoughts as inappropriate. And I cited this study in my previous book, Bliss More, about thought suppression, where they tested students to see how focused they can be on a white polar bear, just thinking about white polar bears. And then they tested them for the same amount of time, seeing if they could let their minds roam free without thinking about a white polar bear. And when they weren't supposed to be thinking about white polar bears in the second half of the study, what they found is that they thought about them more than they thought about them when they were specifically instructed to only think about white polar bears. And so what they concluded from this study was that if you try to resist any thought about anything, you're going to end up thinking about it more than if you just are friendly towards it. And number 2, if you try to focus on any thought about anything, after about 3 or 4 seconds, your mind is naturally going to deviate to an unrelated thought. So this whole thing about monkey mind, it's not accurate. It's the nature of the mind. That's the nature of your mind. And if you resist that nature, there's only one natural outcome, and you're going to create more of what you don't want, which are thoughts. Mm-hmm. So the irony is that when you can have a friendly attitude towards those thoughts, those same thoughts, those thoughts will start to fade faster into the back of your awareness. They may not go away, but they won't dominate your awareness while you're meditating. And that's one of the keys to having a settled mind. So you want to practice that.
That's good.
Which means when your mind wanders, that's fine. And then when your alarm sounds, you take 3 more deep breaths to bring yourself out, and you slowly open your eyes. And that's the 10-step process to the minimalist approach to meditation.
Yeah, I found that really helpful. It's laid out in the book too. So
and it's in greater detail in Bliss More if people want to go back and find that book.
And it's interesting. There was another study out of Harvard by these happiness experts. I think it was Dan Gilbert and Matthew Killingsworth. I mentioned it on the show maybe once or twice before. But they wrote a paper called "A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind." And basically what they found was that the happiest people are actually thinking about what they're doing, that those things aren't divorced. You're not doing one thing while, thinking about something else off in the future, kind of like what we already talked about when you wash the dishes, right? And I thought the interesting thing about that was that thoughts, as they arise within the context of a meditation, are actually an opportunity, because what they actually found in this study was it wasn't that thoughts that people didn't get distracted. People did. That was normal. But the happiest people were the ones that were able to refocus and come back to the thing that they were actually doing.
Yeah, they didn't have to spend time creating a story about what that means, that they got lost in this other thought.
And so that's the utility of the breath there, which is just, okay, cool. That random thought came up about the Red Sox or the Dodgers or whatever it happens to be. Now I'm just coming back here. And over time, you get trained that way. And the greater ability or capacity you have to come back, it appears anyways that the more still and happy you are. So
yeah, 100%. And in my sort of in-person comprehensive trainings, I use the tool of a mantra for that, to come back to this mantra.
Right.
And the mantra is really just a training wheel to get the brain to hardwire itself to do that on its own. And then after a while, you don't need the mantra as much. And so you'll have whole meditations with no mantra. So when people say, oh yeah, I just want to get a mantra, and kind of try to figure this out for myself, it oftentimes doesn't work in the same way, because they don't realize you're using a mantra so that you don't have to use a mantra. It's not about thinking and focusing on this mantra the whole time that you're meditating. So there's more subtle ways to it. And it really is an art. It's a really beautiful art. When you understand it, it's not unlike swimming. When you understand swimming, you can have an enjoyable time in water, any body of water. Yeah. And when you don't understand swimming, you can have a nightmarish time in a swimming pool that's only 6 feet deep.
Yeah. I find that there are these tools, whether it's a mantra or a drishti or a sonic, some other sonic tool, or even like a mala bead, that provide an opportunity for a kind of single pointedness of mind, basically. You can always come back to the mantra. You can always come back to the breath. You can always come back to the drishti. You can always, and the drishti is kind of flexible that way. It can be a sonic drishti or whatever it is. And that certainly is a way to gimmick, a trick in some ways, to get the mind to come back. But I think, where you lay out, we often tend to complicate meditation and make it like so complex that people are like, oh God, I don't know. For me, I'm going to judge myself. I'm not good at it. But how you lay it out, I think, is the road for success.
Thank you.
Yeah. So last thing I will just say, kind of to sum up, when you're talking about the focus on a lot of the little things, particularly the way that we act and behave in relation to others, it's sometimes the smallest things that we repeat that create a certain reputation of who we are. And I thought that was a very insightful point. You talk about that in the book. And I will just say that we both share a lot of friends and a lot of colleagues. We know a lot of people. And you have cultivated, I would say, the most uniform reputation. Everybody says more or less the same thing in such a positive way about how you behave and comport yourself. You know, you're kind, you're responsive, you're steady, you are thoughtful. I just find that across the board, and anyone, and I've had dozens upon dozens of conversations about you with other people. And so you're modeling that well.
Thank you. Yeah, I talk about final impressions, which I think we don't give enough attention to. We're really big on first impressions, making the best first impression.
Yeah.
We're all skilled in that.
Yeah.
But what we tend to neglect is how we leave relationships, how we leave situations, not realizing that the smallest little infractions can end up culminating in a pretty bad reputation. You know, if you get known for the person who doesn't treat people nicely at the end, you know, you send mean messages, or you didn't show up for an interview that somebody set up for you and never acknowledged it, or, you know, you broke up with someone over a text or something like that. You know, if you do that over and over and over, that becomes your reputation, essentially. Yeah. Nobody remembers what happened in the beginning when they first met you. Everybody remembers how you ended it.
Did they transition well out of a job?
Yeah. And it becomes this sort of exaggerated, hyperbolic, grapevine version if it's kind of left to fester long enough. Yeah. And you just become this person that people may not even remember the details, but they know something kind of icky went down.
Yeah.
And you know, I think if we brought more attention to that, we could go back and maybe clean it up and call up someone, even if it's years later, and just, you know, take responsibility, or maybe give more context to the situation. This is what I was going through at the time. I never really acknowledged it. I'm sorry. And those things go a long way too.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of having people speak nicely on your behalf or defend you in rooms where people are speaking badly about you. And you just never know what relationship is going to transpire or benefit from you taking these little small actions to make amends, or to reconcile, or to just leave relationships and spaces better than you found them. So I'm encouraging people to do that as well.
Yeah. Make a good final impression.
Yeah. Always leave situations better, leave people better, even if it means that, you know, you are losing something in the process. Because here's the thing I like to look at it as, like, let's say I'm in a business deal with somebody who screws me. It's happened. Mm-hmm. I chose to be in this business deal with the person. No one forced me to be in that situation. So ultimately, it's my responsibility. Mm-hmm. If I'm in a relationship with a narcissist, I chose to be in that relationship. So yes, they are this or that type of person. They have these character flaws. Fine. Guess what? Everybody has character flaws. You have them. I have them. We all have them. So that's not really new information. But what can be inspiring about that is when you can bring yourself to the point where you can take some responsibility, if not all responsibility, for, you know, having betrayed your boundaries or whatever the thing was that you weren't listening to inside that allowed you to be in that situation for as long as you were in it, and to learn whatever you can learn from that to inform your next choice, you know? So, if you gave your word to someone, and even though maybe they don't honor their word as much, it's not about them not honoring their word. This is a relationship between you and you. You need to honor your word. And then if you do that in a situation or with a person that you don't think deserves you honoring your word, I guarantee you'll never put yourself in that situation again. You'll be even clearer the next time. You'll screen even better the next time, as opposed to making it all about their fault. They shouldn't have done this or that, so I'm not going to, you know, honor my word or whatever. And the truth is, you don't know what's going on with that other person. You don't know. That's right. I was at dinner the other night with a friend of mine, and there was a couple sitting next to us, and they brought out dessert for the couple, and it had a candle in it. So evidently it was somebody's birthday. The guy was on his phone And the woman, while the guy was on the phone, the woman blew out the candle and started eating the dessert. And my friend who I was with got so upset. She was like, oh my God, I hate when I see couples and the man is on his phone and not paying attention and da-da-da-da. And she created this whole story.
Right.
And I was like, well, we don't know what actually is happening at this table. We don't know what their dynamic is. We can't assume that he may be on the phone with their child who's in the hospital. You just never know. And so they ended up leaving before us, and they came by and we chatted. And it turns out they weren't a couple at all. This was like a gay guy taking his friend out to dinner to celebrate her birthday. And so he was making arrangements for later that night, with whatever he was going to be doing. And so, she wasn't offended. The whole story that we create that takes us out of the moment is usually not exactly what's happening, and I think it's just an opportunity when we find ourselves doing it. And I do it too.
Sure.
I'll create stories about stuff that piss me off, and I'll try to be intentional about, well, let me not make these assumptions, just like the 4 agreements. Let me not make the assumptions. Let me just, be open to whatever it is. And if I'm really that interested, I can seek to understand it better. Otherwise, I'll just stay in my lane and keep doing what I'm doing. And usually, you'll make better choices that way than taking on someone's story and then going with it. And then you're making actions that may not be aligned with what you think is going to make the best final impression for you based on something you don't even really know about.
Right.
Because you haven't really taken the time to know about that. So
you can't know. I mean, there's a word called sonder, which is the realization that every single stranger that you see on the street has a life as complicated and convoluted as your own.
Yeah. And it's like a museum. They're all museums.
Yeah. And so how do you know what's going on? Anyway, such a joy. The book is Travel Light. I'm going to hold it up right here for those watching on the YouTube. But spiritual minimalism to live a more fulfilled life. And it's just overflowing, brimming with gems and wisdom and fantastic principles. And I love your mind. I love being with you. And I hope this is the midpoint, just the middle of our relationship, because we're
just getting started, man.
Getting going. All right. Thanks, man.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
Right on. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this interview from the Commune podcast, then click subscribe and check out this video right here.